I swear, this story is 100% real. It happened right next door. My name's Alex Reed, and I sometimes feel like I'm still living it, trapped in a constant state of hypervigilance. I find myself always glancing over my shoulder, convinced I see the outline of a man in my peripheral vision, just beyond the edge of the fence line. The fear never really leaves. I try to tell myself it's over, but the knowledge of what happened next door has permanently poisoned my reality, turning my quiet suburban street into a stage for a buried crime. Mr. Henderson moved in 6 months back. He wasn't just a neighbor, he was the neighbor. The perfect, charming suburban homeowner who seemed to live life according to a strict, ancient HOA rulebook from the 1950s, an outward conformity that felt deeply menacing. Great lawn, manicured down to the millimeter, every blade of grass exactly the same height. His expensive German sedan was always spotless in the driveway, parked at a mathematically precise angle. He had a huge, booming, fake laugh that sounded exactly like it came from a sitcom, a laugh designed to carry across 3 properties. He was impeccably dressed, always in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, even on weekends. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something sterile, like fresh bleach or a hospital hallway. A strange, unsettling combination that always made me subconsciously feel like something had been scrubbed clean. And he was sickeningly sweet to his wife, Sarah. That's what he wanted everyone to think. He'd make these loud, performative gestures for the benefit of the block, rushing out to open her car door even if she was 2 feet from it, or publicly correcting her in the grocery store aisle with a condescending smile, calling her my dear, fragile thing. One time, I watched him meticulously rearrange the collar of her sweater in public, a gesture so possessive it felt like he was adjusting a leash. It wasn't love. It was control wrapped up in a pretty, domestic ribbon, expertly tied so no one could untangle it without tearing the fabric of their own perception. He never lingered in conversation with me or anyone else. Every interaction was brief, transactional, and designed only to confirm his flawless image. I started to understand that his perfection was a shield, and its cost was Sarah's freedom. But I'll never forget the first time I knew something was fundamentally, monstrously wrong. It was a stifling hot afternoon in late July, the air thick and still, heavy with humidity clinging to my skin. I was by my fence, half-heartedly watering my petunias, trying to distract myself from the heat. I heard a loud, desperate yelp from their house, a sound ripped straight from someone's throat, quickly cut off, like a switch had been flipped, silencing a machine, followed instantly by a huge, sickening thud. It sounded heavy, wet, and final, like a sack of concrete hitting hardwood, shaking the glass in my own window pane. My body went rigid, paralyzed by the sheer terror of the sound. And then, total, dead silence. For a full minute, nothing moved, nothing creaked. My heart was pounding, a deafening drumbeat ringing in my ears. A few minutes later, Henderson walked out the front door, whistling a cheerful, saccharine tune, the theme from an old TV show, ironically. He was holding one perfect, dark red rose, the color of old, oxidized blood, its velvety petals almost black at the edges. He hands it to Sarah, who followed him out right after him. Her eyes were glued to the ground, her shoulders hunched, trying to make herself disappear into her own clothes. A fresh, dark bruise was already visible beneath her overly applied foundation, a smudge of purple against the beige that no amount of makeup could hide. She wouldn't look at me, but I saw it. One quick, terrified glance. A silent, desperate flicker of acknowledgement. A raw plea, before she bolted inside. I realized that rose wasn't a gift. It was a signature. It was a marker of his territory, a trophy symbolizing the damage he'd just inflicted, presented in a cold, public ceremony designed to silence witnesses. Over the next few months, the accidents and shouting became a suffocating, terrifying rhythm of life next door. I started logging them in a mental calendar, recording the dates and the resulting injury, not just for proof, but to maintain my own sanity. I desperately needed to believe I wasn't crazy. The time she came out with a massive bandage on her wrist, claiming she tangled with a cabinet door while putting away dishes. The constant, low-level yelling that sounded less like anger and more like instruction. A monotonous, controlling drone, which stopped abruptly the second his vehicle pulled out of the driveway. I noticed he often played classical music loudly before leaving, a strange, beautiful soundtrack to the violence he left behind. I saw sprained ankles, black eyes, and once, during a breezy afternoon, a nasty, deep red rope burn circling her forearm when her sleeve slipped, clearly visible beneath a thin cardigan. His excuses, like the ridiculous story about a sprained ankle from a rogue patch of ice in August, never even tried to be believable. It was like he enjoyed the intellectual game, savoring the fact that he could lie to our faces, knowing we couldn't challenge him without concrete proof. It was a calculated cruelty, a constant testing of the limits of suburban denial. Sarah was perpetually on edge. She moved like she was anticipating a physical blow, constantly bracing herself. Her hands shook visibly when she held anything, whether it was a teacup or the mailbox flag. She was always accompanied by Henderson, who squeezed her arms so tight his knuckles were white. His grip, a physical restraint that prevented her from fleeing or gesturing. If she tried to speak to anyone, he'd smoothly interrupt, diverting the conversation back to their shared gardening projects or their upcoming romantic getaway. My other neighbors, the Mrs. Gables of the world, shrugged it off as a rough patch, or maybe they just preferred the convenience of willful denial. But I saw the silent scream in Sarah's eyes, and the helplessness I felt watching it was becoming a physical illness in my stomach. Constant nausea, crippling insomnia, a crushing weight of moral failure. Every morning, I woke up guilty that I hadn't done more, hadn't found the magic words to save her. I finally tried to help once. It was brief, stupid, and fueled by desperation. She was alone for a few seconds, rushing to get the mail. "Sarah, are you okay?" I whispered, leaning over the fence, my voice trembling and weak, almost unrecognizable. I tried not to look directly at the dark purple mark high on her arm that day, focusing instead on her frayed dress. She physically flinched, pulling her shoulders up and shrinking away like she'd been struck by lightning. She mumbled a barely audible, "Fine," her eyes wide and frantically pleading for me to stop, to not make it worse, and she bolted back in. The fear in her was so intense, it was like a tangible barrier. I knew calling the police without her cooperation was useless. I'd only confirm her paranoia and likely worsen her situation. I stood there, defeated, my fists clenched in impotent rage. Worse than that, I started to notice him noticing me. My bedroom window became a surveillance post. Once, late at night, I peered over the fence and saw him looking directly into my window from his dark hallway, a black silhouette against the perpetual gloom of his drawn curtains. He didn't wave. He just stared for what felt like an eternity, until I backed away, my scalp crawling. The next morning, a few perfect, dark red rose petals were scattered deliberately on my side of the lawn. He was sending a message. I watched, helpless, as the light in Sarah's eyes dimmed until it was nothing but a dull, hollow stare, a reflection of the permanent shadow that had consumed her life. Then came the silence. It wasn't peaceful, it screamed. It lasted for a solid, agonizing week. Sarah was completely gone. No more coffee ritual on the porch. No more seeing her tiny car leave the driveway. The lack of movement was oppressive, a physical weight on the neighborhood, heavy as humidity. Henderson was still normal, meticulously tending his lawn, but that utter normalcy made it worse, a mask that had been cemented in place. Their house was dark, completely sealed off. Curtains drawn 24/7. No lights came on in the evenings. The absolute lack of noise was deafening, worse than the sporadic yelling ever was. It felt like the house was holding its breath, and I was holding mine with it, constantly listening for a sound that never came. My stomach churned with sickening, absolute fear. I couldn't sleep. Every passing car made me jump. I called the non-emergency line one last time, hysterical, recounting the whole history, begging them to break the door down, arguing that this sudden, final silence was the loudest evidence they needed. But they only repeated that they'd already done a wellness check, seen Henderson, and would keep an eye out. They told me to stop tying up their lines. I knew I wasn't waiting for her return. I was waiting for the inevitable end to be confirmed by an official body. The system had failed her, and I had failed her. 3 days later, the ambulance showed up. No sirens, just a quiet, horrifying presence pulling up at dawn while the morning dew was still fresh. I watched, frozen behind my own sheer curtains, my body trembling uncontrollably, the condensation from my panicked breath fogging the glass, as they wheeled out a gurney covered by a stark white sheet. My breath hitched, seizing in my lungs. Henderson stood on his porch, playing the role of the perfectly grieving husband, his face a mask of dignified sorrow, rubbing his temples with just the right amount of anguish. He made a tearful statement to the one reporter who showed up, claiming Sarah had fallen down the stairs while retrieving something from the attic. He didn't even bother with a plausible lie. The lie was simple, neat, and impenetrable. He was questioned, but was back home hours later, before the neighborhood even fully woke up. A small, dry obituary ran in the local paper, mentioning the tragic accident. No one believed it. The whole story was a threadbare lie, but there was zero physical proof otherwise, and no witnesses to contradict him. His control was complete. His malice had won. He got away with it, and the world just kept turning. A week after the funeral, the memory was a gaping, infected wound in the neighborhood's consciousness. The silence was back, but now it was truly final. I was back in my garden, forcing myself to feel normal again, trying to pretend the house next door wasn't the tomb where my friend had died. Henderson was trimming his rose bushes, the shears clicking against the stems, the same perfect, deep red ones he always gave her. His back was to me, but I felt his awareness, his knowledge of my presence, like a physical weight pressing down on my spine. I was about to turn and rush inside, my nerves shot, when he spoke. His voice was low, clear, and all that fake cheer was utterly gone. It was cold, flat, and final. It was the sound of bedrock. It was like the voice of the house itself speaking directly into my mind. "You know," he said, not turning around, the snipping of the shears the only sound in the suffocating silence. "Some people just don't know how to stay quiet. They just can't resist trying to pry, sticking their noses where they don't belong. It gets messy." I froze instantly, the trowel slipping from my hand and hitting the flagstone with a sharp, echoing clink that felt deafeningly loud, a sound I instantly regretted making. My blood ran cold, turning to lead in my veins. The sound of the shears stopped. He slowly, deliberately turned, holding that one dark red rose pinched between his gloved thumb and forefinger, examining its velvety perfection with chilling fondness. He smiled, that sickeningly sweet smile, but this time it was pure, unadulterated predator's grin. A slow, terrifying widening of the mouth with no crinkle in the eyes, no warmth, only threat. His eyes, though, they were what truly terrified me. They were arctic, utterly empty, and they held a promise that made my breath hitch, confirming everything I had ever feared. "It's a shame about Sarah," he continued, his gaze unwavering, taking one slow, measured step toward the fence that divided our yards, bridging the gap with his sheer intent and terrifying proximity. "She was a very quiet woman in the end. A great relief, really. Less noise, less trouble, less need for correcting. I prefer quiet neighbors." I didn't run. I backed away slowly, heart pounding like crazy, a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. I knew right then and there, no doubt about it, he wasn't just reflecting on Sarah's fate. He wasn't just reminding me of what he'd done. He was talking about me. He had seen me watching, documenting, recording every detail in my head, and he was issuing the last, ultimate warning. Chilling. I am now the one who has to stay quiet, paralyzed by fear and guilt, knowing that any sound, any movement, any attempt to speak the truth will turn me into the next dark red rose in his horrifyingly perfect garden. I live under his watch, terrified of making a single, fatal sound, waiting for the day he decides my silence has run out.